He had built an empire on silence and fear. No one crossed Kang Jun-hyuk. No one dared look him in the eye. In the criminal underground of Seoul, his name alone ended arguments, dissolved alliances, and buried men who thought they were untouchable. He was the silent king, cold, precise, and completely alone. Then a stranger with coffee-stained hands looked straight at him and refused to apologize the way everyone else did. She didn't bow, she didn't beg. She just looked at him like he was a man. That was the moment everything began to fall apart. If you've never watched one of our stories before, hit subscribe right now, drop a like, and tell us in the comments what city or country you're watching from. We want to see exactly how far this story travels. And stay with us until the very end, because what happens between a feared crime lord and the one woman brave enough to see through him, that is something you will not want to miss. Book. The morning Kang Jun-hyuk walked into Cafe Onyx, he had already made 3 decisions that would change lives before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. He had approved a silent asset transfer that would quietly remove a business rival from the Seoul financial landscape. He had ordered the quiet termination of a contract with a distribution partner who had been skimming from Baekryon's secondary accounts for 7 months. And he had told his head of security, Min Do-hwan, to begin surveillance on a mid-level politician who had made the mistake of threatening to investigate one of Jun-hyuk's legitimate front companies. None of these decisions caused him any visible discomfort. He made them the way other men decided what to eat for breakfast, calmly, practically, with full awareness of the consequences and no need to second-guess any of it. He was 36 years old. He had been running Baekryon for 9 years. He had long ago stopped counting the number of people who hated him. The cafe was one of the few places he came to without a full security detail. He kept 2 men outside on the street, one at the corner table near the back exit. Beyond that, he wanted space. The cafe was quiet in the early morning, high-end without being flashy, and the owner had learned years ago that when Jun-hyuk was present, nobody else needed to know about it. He sat at the same table every time, near the window overlooking a narrow side street where the early light came in flat and gray and honest. He set his laptop on the table, arranged his documents in 2 neat stacks, and ordered black coffee without looking at the menu. He had not slept more than 4 hours. He did not look it. That was something he had trained into himself over years. The ability to appear completely composed, regardless of what was happening underneath. His face was a controlled surface. His voice never rose above a certain register. His hands were still. Min Do-hwan had once told a subordinate that Jun-hyuk was the only man he knew who looked calmer during a crisis than during a meeting. That was not entirely true. Inside the stillness, Jun-hyuk was always running calculations. Threats, exit routes, variables, loyalties. Everything was constantly moving in the background. The composure was real, but it was also armor. He had learned early that the moment you let people see you sweat, you gave them something they could use against you. He was reviewing a contract clause on his laptop when the collision happened. He heard it before he fully understood what it was. A sharp intake of breath, the sound of liquid against paper, the reflexive clatter of a cup hitting the edge of the table, and then the full weight of hot coffee spreading across the document on his left, the edge of his laptop, and the sleeve of his jacket. He moved on instinct. Both hands went to the laptop first, lifting it clear of the liquid. Then the documents. One stack compromised, the other still dry. He picked up the dry stack and moved it to the opposite end of the table with the same methodical calm he used for everything. Only then did he look up. The woman standing over him was not what he expected. She was young. Mid-20s, he guessed, though there was something around the eyes that looked older than her age. She was tall, with close-cut natural hair, and a dark green jacket that was now splattered with coffee on one side. She held the empty cup in one hand and was reaching across the table with the other, pulling napkins from the dispenser with fast, determined movements, pressing them against the wet document stack like she could undo the damage by sheer force of effort. She was not crying. She was not apologizing in the way that people in Seoul usually apologized to him when they had done something wrong. The deep bow, the flood of formal language, the performance of total submission. She pressed the napkins down hard, looked at the laptop, then looked at him. "Is it damaged?" she asked. Her Korean was functional but accented. American. The English underneath the question was obvious. "No," he said. She let out a breath and dropped her shoulders slightly. Then she straightened up, looked at the ruined document on the table, and pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wasn't watching where I was going and I clipped your table. This was completely my fault and I'm sorry for the damage to your—" She looked at the jacket sleeve. "That's a very expensive jacket, and I'm sorry about that too." She was still holding the wet napkins. A drop of coffee ran down her wrist onto her hand and she didn't seem to notice. Jun Hyuk looked at her for a moment. People did not usually speak to him this directly. People who inadvertently made physical contact with him in a public space and happened to know who he was typically reacted in one of two ways. They either panicked completely or they launched into an excessive performance of apology designed to preemptively protect themselves. This woman had done neither. She had assessed the situation, dealt with what she could deal with, and then apologized once, cleanly, without ornamentation. He looked back at the document. The bottom half was destroyed. It was a working draft of something his legal team would need to reproduce. Inconvenient, not catastrophic. "Sit down," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You're dripping on the floor," he said. "Sit down. Someone will bring you a cloth." She looked at her hand as if she had just noticed. Then she looked at the chair across from him. "I wasn't planning to stay," she said. "I didn't say it was an invitation," he said. "I said, sit down before you make a bigger mess." She sat down. He signaled the server, who appeared with the kind of immediate attention that told her this man was not a regular customer. He was something else entirely. Jun Hyuk asked for a cloth and a replacement coffee, and the server nodded and vanished without a word. When he looked back, the woman was watching him with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. Not fear, not calculation. Something more like puzzlement. "You're not angry," she said. "Should I be?" "Most people would be." "Most people waste energy on things that don't require it," he said. He pulled the damaged document toward him and assessed the legible portions. "What is your name?" She paused. He noticed the pause. She was deciding how much to give him, which meant she had learned somewhere along the way that giving your name to a stranger was a form of small surrender. He found that interesting. "Amara," she said. "Amara Whitfield." "You're a student," he said. It wasn't a question. The bag she'd dropped when she sat down was heavy with the specific weight of textbooks, and the jacket had the slightly worn look of someone who spent more on education than on clothes. "Graduate student," she said. "Korean Studies and Urban Sociology. Joint program through Yonsei and an American University partnership." "How long have you been in Seoul?" 3 weeks. He looked up at her. 3 weeks. Her Korean was already functional at a conversational level, which meant she had been working before she arrived, probably hard. That told him something. "And you chose to get coffee in this particular cafe," he said. "It was the first place I found that wasn't already crowded and didn't have music loud enough to disrupt reading," she said. "I came to work." "So did I." The server returned with a cloth. Amara cleaned her hand with it, then sat back and looked at him with the same direct attention she'd been using since she sat down. It was starting to become mildly disconcerting, not because it was threatening, it wasn't, but because it was unusual in a way he hadn't encountered in a long time. She was not pretending anything. She was simply looking at him and paying attention to what she saw. "You don't recognize me," he said. "Should I?" "Most people in Seoul would." She studied his face for a moment. "You have a security detail," she said. "I noticed them outside when I came in, and there's a man at the back table who hasn't looked at his coffee once." She said it without particular emotion, just observation stated as fact. "So you're either government, military, or you're something else." He said nothing. "But you came in without a fuss, and you haven't made any calls," she continued, "and you were working, not waiting. So whatever you are, you're used to it. It doesn't define the morning for you." He watched her. "What does that tell you about me?" "That you've been doing it a long time," she said. "Whatever it is." He almost smiled. He didn't, but it was closer than it had been in a while. "I'm Kang Jun Hyuk," he said. She nodded slowly. The name didn't hit her the way it hit most people, which confirmed what he already suspected. She genuinely didn't know who he was. Amara Whitfield, she said again, which you already knew. I did. The replacement coffee arrived. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked out the window at the gray morning street. I'll pay for the jacket, she said. I want to be clear about that. I don't know what dry cleaning costs for something like that, but I'll pay it. You don't need to. I know I don't need to, she said. I want to. There's a difference. He looked at her for a moment. There is, he agreed. She stayed another 40 minutes. He didn't ask her to. She simply kept working at the other end of the table, pulling her laptop from the heavy bag and opening it without making a production of being there. She didn't try to fill silence with conversation. She didn't steal glances at him the way nervous people did. She was simply present, doing what she'd come to do, occupying her share of the space without apology. When she left, she placed a folded piece of paper on his side of the table without a word. He waited until she was gone before he opened it. It was a handwritten figure, the estimated cost of dry cleaning a high-end wool jacket in Seoul, which she had apparently looked up on her phone while he wasn't watching. Beneath it, a phone number, and below that, in clean, tight handwriting, in case the actual cost is higher. A.W. He looked at it for a long moment, then he put it in his jacket pocket. He didn't need the money, he didn't need the contact, he didn't need anything this woman had to offer, practically speaking. But he folded the paper carefully before he put it away, which was something he did not normally do with things he didn't intend to keep. He learned more about her in the next 48 hours than she would have been comfortable with had she known it was happening. It wasn't anything intrusive. It was simply the way Jun Hyuk operated. When someone entered his awareness in an unexpected way, he gathered information. It was a habit so deeply embedded he no longer thought of it as a choice. Amara Whitfield, 26, from Chicago. Graduate fellowship, 2 years. Academic focus was the sociology of organized urban spaces, which in Seoul translated to studying how the city's structural development had been shaped by both official policy and unofficial pressure over the past 3 decades. Her university partnership was with a cultural research initiative backed, through several layers of corporate structure, by one of Korean's legitimate holding companies. That last detail was interesting. Not alarming. Interesting. The research initiative was clean. It had been set up precisely to be clean, to function as a credible academic and cultural organization without any visible connection to the organization funding it at several removes. Amara Whitfield was exactly what she appeared to be, a serious graduate student on a competitive fellowship who had come to Seoul to do research. She was not a threat. She was not an asset. She was not anyone he needed to do anything about. He kept the piece of paper. The second time he saw her was not by design. He was leaving a meeting at a hotel in Gangnam when he saw her in the lobby. She was speaking to someone at the concierge desk with the particular focused expression of a person who was struggling to communicate something important across a language gap. She had a folder under one arm and was holding her phone out with something on the screen, a map he could see from a distance, or an address. The concierge was politely failing to understand what she needed. He watched for a moment from across the lobby. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't get frustrated in a visible way. She tried the same thing 3 different ways, pulled up something else on her phone, pointed, tried again. He crossed the lobby. She needs directions to the Municipal Records Archive on Ulji Row, he said to the concierge in Korean. She has a meeting there. He looked at Amara. You have a meeting there. At 2 o'clock, she said. Yes. The concierge map app is showing me a route that ends at a shopping center. He told the concierge the correct address and asked for it to be written down. The concierge produced a card with the address and the nearest subway exit. Amara took it, looked at it, and looked at him. Kang Jun-hyuk, she said. Amara Whitfield, he said. She looked down at the card, then back at him. Thank you. This is twice now. It is. I'm starting to wonder if Seoul is smaller than I thought. It's large, he said, but patterns repeat. She looked at him steadily. Is that your way of saying this is a coincidence? It is a coincidence, he said. She tilted her head slightly. She didn't look entirely convinced, but she accepted it, which was practical of her. Thank you, she said again. Genuinely, I would have spent another hour on that. She left. He watched her go, the way she moved through the lobby, unhurried but purposeful, the folder under her arm, already looking at the card again and orienting herself. His head of security, Do-hwan, appeared at his shoulder. "The car is ready," Do-hwan said. "I know," Jun-hyuk said. He didn't move for another moment. "She's connected to the Yonsei Partner Research Initiative," he said, not to Do-hwan particularly, just aloud. 3 weeks in Seoul. Does her own navigation. Doesn't panic. "Is that relevant?" Do-hwan asked. Jun-hyuk considered. "I don't know yet," he said. Just. 3 days later, he texted the number on the paper. The jacket cost was not significant, but thank you for the offer. KJH. He sent it, set his phone down, and returned to the contract he was reviewing. 12 minutes later, his phone buzzed. "Glad to hear it. I've been slightly worried about that." AW. He read it twice, then he put the phone down again. He was not a man who texted people casually. He was not a man who maintained social connections outside of professional necessity or organizational loyalty. The people in his life were assets, subordinates, partners, or they were threats. There was no category for an American graduate student who spilled coffee on him and then looked him in the eye without blinking. He picked the phone back up. "How is the archive research going?" The response came faster this time. Slowly. "The filing system is from 1994 and nobody's touched it since, but I found something interesting about zoning decisions in the Yongsan redevelopment that might be worth writing about." "Do you know anything about that period?" He stared at the message. The Yongsan redevelopment. The period she was asking about. He knew a great deal about it. More than she would expect. More than he would be comfortable explaining in a text message. "Somewhat," he typed. "It's complicated history." "Everything here is," she wrote back. "I'm figuring that out fast." He set the phone down a final time and looked out the window at the city. Somewhere out there, Amara Whitfield was sitting in a 1994 filing system, chasing answers about a city she'd known for 3 weeks, with no idea that the man she'd texted was one of the reasons some of those files looked the way they did. He should end the conversation there. The logical thing, the clean, controlled thing, was to wish her well with the research and return to the work that actually mattered. He did not do the logical thing. "If you have specific questions about that period," he typed, "I may be able to help." Informally. He watched the 3 dots appear and disappear twice before her response came through. "Why would you do that?" He thought about that for a moment. "You paid for the jacket you didn't actually ruin," he wrote. "I owe you something." A pause. Then, "That's the strangest reason I've ever heard for offering to help someone with their research. Most things worth doing have strange reasons." Another pause. Longer this time. "Okay," she wrote finally. Informally. "Thank you." He put the phone in his jacket pocket and returned to the contract. But for the first time in longer than he could easily measure, the work in front of him felt slightly less like the only thing in the room. He did not tell himself it was anything. He was too experienced in his own psychology for that kind of self-deception. What he told himself was this: she was interesting. She was harmless. The connection to the research initiative created a reasonable professional context for occasional contact, and he had learned over 9 years of running an organization that demanded total vigilance that the mind needed intermittent relief from its own constant pressure. Amara Whitfield was, in some way he could not fully articulate, a pressure valve. He believed that for approximately 2 weeks. Then she called him at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night because she had been followed home from the archive by someone she didn't recognize, and she hadn't known who else to call. He had 2 men at her building within 7 minutes. He was there himself in 14. She was sitting on the front steps when he arrived, her arms folded across her knees, her jaw set. She was not crying. She looked up when he came through the gate, and something in her face shifted. Not relief, exactly. Something more like the particular tension that leaves a body when it finally has someone to give the weight to. "I'm probably overreacting," she said. "Describe him," he said. She did. Concisely, accurately, with the kind of detail that told him she had been paying attention even while she was frightened. Height, build, coat color. The way the man had paced his walk to stay exactly half a block behind her for 4 blocks, before she turned into a lit convenience store and waited until he was gone. He listened without interrupting. Then he said 3 words to Do-won, who stepped away to make calls. "It wasn't a coincidence," Jun-hyuk said. Amara looked at him. "Jun-hyuk, someone was actually following me?" "Someone was watching to see who you would call," he said. The silence that followed was the kind that changes things. He watched her process what that meant, that she had been tested, that someone was already trying to understand her connection to him, that the 3 weeks of quiet research she thought she'd been doing in an anonymous city had registered somewhere on a map he hadn't told her existed. "Because of you," she said. Not accusatory, just precise. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze. "So what does that mean for me?" "It means you're not invisible anymore," he said, "whether you wanted to be visible or not." She absorbed that. He watched her think it through, the way she worked through problems by going still first, the same way she had in the cafe when she'd been deciding whether to give him her name. It was a quality he had noticed without consciously cataloging. She thought before she spoke. That was rarer than it should have been. "And you?" she said. "What does it mean for you?" He looked at her sitting on the steps, her jacket pulled close against the night air, coffee-free this time, looking up at him without the slightest shift toward performance. "It means I should have been more careful," he said. She nodded slowly. "Are you going to tell me you can't see me anymore? For my own protection?" Her tone was flat, not angry, but flat in a way that told him she was braced for exactly that. He was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was that he should say yes. The clean answer, the controlled answer, the answer a careful man would give. "No," he said. She waited. "But you should know what you're standing next to," he said, "so you can make an informed choice about whether you want to keep standing there." She looked at him for a long time. The night around them was Seoul at 11 p.m. Traffic sounds from 2 blocks over, the hum of a convenience store, the distant rhythm of the city that never fully went quiet. "Tell me," she said. And that was the moment. Not the coffee, not the texts, not the hotel lobby. That was the moment Kang Jun-hyuk understood he was already in trouble, because he wanted to. He had never wanted to tell anyone anything. He opened his mouth to begin, and then his phone rang. Do-won, short signal, which meant something was happening at the Gangnam office that could not wait. He looked at the phone, then at Amara. "I have to go," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll have someone stay on the block tonight." "Okay." "And Amara?" He stopped. He looked at her one more time. The set of her jaw, the steady quality of her attention, the complete absence of demand in her expression. She was not asking him to stay. She was not performing bravery. She was just sitting there being exactly who she was. "I'll come back," he said. She looked at him with an expression he could not fully read. "I know that too," she said quietly. He turned and walked to the car. Behind him, the night swallowed the sound of the steps. He did not look back. But in the car, sitting behind tinted glass as Do-won accelerated toward Gangnam, Kang Jun-hyuk, the man who had run an empire on silence and certainty for 9 years, realized that for the first time in recent memory, he genuinely did not know what happened next. And the part of him that should have found that alarming found it something else entirely. The call from Do-won had been about money. It was always about money, or about the people who moved it, or about the gap between what had been promised and what had actually arrived. This particular gap was 400 million won, and the man responsible for it was a mid-level distribution coordinator named Baek Seong-jae, who had apparently decided that Baek Korean's accounting team was too slow to notice a systematic skim across 14 separate transactions over 3 months. They had noticed. Jun-hyuk sat at the head of the conference table on the 14th floor of the Gangnam office building at 11:47 at night, his jacket still on, and looked at Baek Seong-jae across the table with the expression he used when he had already decided what was going to happen and was simply giving the other person time to understand it. Baek Seong-jae was sweating through his shirt. "I can explain," Seong-jae said. "You already did," Jun-hyuk said. Twice. Both explanations were different. Seung-jae's mouth opened and closed. He was 41 years old, had worked within Baekryon's distribution network for 6 years, had a wife and 2 children in Mapo, and had apparently believed at some point that he was smart enough to steal from the one organization in Seoul that had built its entire structure on the ability to find exactly this kind of discrepancy. "I'll return it," Seung-jae said. "All of it. I have some of it. I can get the rest. Give me 2 weeks. "The money is not the issue," Jun-hyuk said. Seung-jae blinked. "Then what?" "The issue is that you believed you could do this without consequences," Jun-hyuk said. "Which means you have been watching how we operate and concluding that we are careless. I need to correct that conclusion. Not just for you, for everyone who is watching how I respond to you right now." The room was quiet. Do-won stood near the door. 2 other men were at the far wall. Nobody moved. "What does that mean?" Seung-jae asked. His voice had dropped to something barely audible. "It means you're going to spend the next 6 months working directly under our auditing division without pay, accounting for every transaction you've touched since you joined the network," Jun-hyuk said. "You will have no access to distribution channels. You will report daily. And at the end of 6 months, if the full accounting is clean, you will receive a settlement and a termination." Seung-jae stared at him. "That's it? What were you expecting?" Seung-jae swallowed hard. He had clearly been expecting something significantly worse. "I know what you thought," Jun-hyuk said. "That's the problem. You thought I was the kind of man who resolves problems with violence because that is what my reputation suggests." He leaned back in his chair. "Violence is expensive. It creates attention. It solves one problem and generates 4 more. You stole from me because you misread me. I'm giving you the opportunity to correct that misreading." He stood. The meeting was over. "But hear me clearly, Seung-jae," he said. "If at any point in those 6 months the accounting reveals something you haven't disclosed tonight, the offer expires." He left the room without waiting for a response. In the elevator going down, Do-won said nothing for a long moment. Then, "The men are going to think you're going soft." "Some of them," Jun-hyuk said. "Does that concern you?" "Let them think it," Jun-hyuk said. "The ones who matter will watch how it plays out and draw the correct conclusion." Do-won considered this. "And if it doesn't play out cleanly?" "Then I'll be wrong," Jun-hyuk said, "and I'll deal with being wrong." The elevator opened. He walked through the lobby and into the night air and sat in the back of the car and did not take his phone out until they were 2 blocks from the Gangnam office. He looked at the screen. No message from Amara. He hadn't expected one. It was nearly midnight. He put the phone away. He stared at the city moving past the window. He thought about the look on her face when he'd said, "I'll come back." Not gratitude. Not relief. Just a kind of quiet assessment. The same one she'd given him in the cafe that first morning. Like she was deciding whether the statement was true and filing the result away without sharing her conclusion. He didn't know why that bothered him. He told himself it didn't. He came back the next morning. She was already awake when his car pulled up. He could see her light on from the street. Do-won confirmed the block had been quiet through the night. No repeat of the surveillance. Jun Hyuk went alone to the front steps and rang the call button. She answered on the second ring. "It's early," she said through the intercom. "Not who is it?" She already knew. "I said I'd come back." A pause, then the door buzzed open. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. Narrow hallway, a smell of old wood and someone's cooking from the floor below. A single window at the end of the corridor that let in the flat morning light. She opened the door before he knocked. She was in a gray sweatshirt and loose pants, her hair pulled back. No performance, no adjustment for his arrival. She stepped aside to let him in and walked directly back to the kitchen counter where she had a coffee already going and pulled a second cup out of the cabinet with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who had been expecting him. The apartment was small and absolutely covered in work. Papers on the table, a research board on the wall that she'd built herself out of a corkboard, and printed maps of Seoul's urban development zones. Sticky notes in 2 colors, one Korean, one English. Books with markers in them piled in 3 stacks near the window. Her laptop was open to something he couldn't read from this angle. You actually do this all day, he said. And some of the night, she said. She handed him the coffee. He looked at it. She had made it black without asking. You remembered, he said. You're not complicated, she said. She picked up her own cup and sat at the table, pulling her feet up under her with the ease of someone completely at home in their own space. Sit down. You're making the room feel smaller. He sat in the chair across from her. He looked at the research board. She had drawn connecting lines between the Yongsan redevelopment zones and 3 other locations across the city, with dates marked at each connection point. What are you seeing? He asked. I'm seeing a pattern in how certain land use decisions in the 90s created structural inequality that's still visible in the city's current housing distribution, she said. But some of the decisions don't fit the official record. The policy rationale doesn't match the outcome, which usually means the actual decision was made somewhere other than the public record. She was looking at the board the way she looked at him, directly, with full attention, not managing the gaze. That's a careful way of saying corruption, he said. That's a careful way of saying I don't have proof yet, she said. I don't make claims before I have proof. I have questions. What kind of questions? She looked at him. The kind that might be awkward if you're connected to the people involved. He held her gaze. Ask them anyway. She watched him for a moment. Then she got up, went to the research board, and pointed to a cluster of dates in 1997. 3 major rezoning approvals in a 14-month window. All 3 benefited the same 3 holding companies. One of those companies dissolved in 2003, and its assets were distributed to 6 successor entities. She looked back at him. Do you know who owned those successor entities? Some of them, he said. Were you one of them? The question landed flat and clean, the way she delivered most things, without decorative framing, without apology for asking. No, he said. Betrayal didn't exist in 1997. I was 17. He paused. But I know the men who did, knew. Some of them are dead, some are retired, some are in positions you would find surprising. She lowered her arm and looked at him. Would you tell me? Some of it, he said. The parts that won't create problems for people who are still living. That's a very particular line. It's the only line I have, he said. She nodded, turned back to the board. Okay, she said. Tell me what you can. They spent 2 hours on it. He told her things he had never put into a conversation with anyone outside of organizational necessity. Not the mechanics of what had happened in those years, but the logic of it, the texture of how decisions moved through the city's unofficial networks, the way power arranged itself behind the visible surface of policy and development plans. She listened with her whole attention and asked questions that were sharper than he expected every single time. At one point, she caught a contradiction in something he'd said about the timeline and called it out immediately, without softening the observation. That doesn't match, she said. You said the second approval came before the financing cleared, but if the financing wasn't in place, there was no incentive to approve it early. So either the approval was political rather than financial, or someone was running the risk on behalf of a party that hadn't committed yet. Which one was it? He looked at her. Political, he said, which means someone was owed a favor. Yes. A significant one. Yes. She wrote it down. She didn't ask him to elaborate on the favor. She had enough to draw the inference, and she knew it, and she moved on. He found himself thinking, not for the first time, that she was one of the most precise thinkers he had sat across from in years. And he sat across from extremely precise thinkers on a regular basis, most of whom were lawyers or financial strategists paid large sums to be that way. Amara Whitfield was that way for free, apparently just because she was. The problem began presenting itself clearly about 10 days later. It did not arrive in a single moment. It arrived the way most problems in Jun Hyuk's experience arrived, gradually, then suddenly. A series of small signals that individually meant nothing but in aggregate meant everything. The first signal was a conversation with his chief of intelligence, a woman named Oh Hyunmi, who had been with Baekryong for 11 years, and who communicated primarily in data and implication. Hyunmi came to him on a Wednesday morning with a thin folder, and the expression she wore when she was delivering information she found personally distasteful. Someone is asking questions about the research initiative, she said. Not about the initiative itself, about who interacts with it. Who's asking? The inquiry is coming through 3 layers, but the origin appears to be connected to Lee Chang-min's network. Jun-hyuk was still. Lee Chang-min was the closest thing Baekryun had to a structural rival. Not an enemy in any declared sense, but a competing organization that occupied similar territory and had spent the better part of 4 years looking for leverage against Jun Hyuk personally. They had not found any. He had been careful, specifically because he understood how leverage worked and had made sure he gave them nothing to hold. "What specifically are they asking about the initiative?" he said. "They're looking for names of foreign participants with recent direct contact with you," Hyunmi said. "The inquiry is narrow, which suggests they already have most of what they're looking for and are trying to confirm one specific thing." He kept his voice even. "Timeline on the inquiry?" "It started 11 days ago." 11 days. 3 days before this night, Amara had been followed home. He looked at Hyunmi. She looked back at him with the flat patience of someone who had already drawn the obvious conclusion and was waiting for him to catch up. "They were testing the response," he said. "That's my read," she said. Lee Changmin's people had followed Amara to see who she would call. She had called him. He had responded within 7 minutes with personnel and then followed up himself. They had their confirmation. He sat with that for a moment. "What's Changmin's play?" he said. "Unknown. But he's been consolidating pressure on 3 of your secondary distribution channels simultaneously, which started the same week as the inquiry. It's coordinated." Hyunmi paused. "He's building towards something." "He's building toward a negotiation," Jun-hyuk said. "He wants something specific, and he's creating pressure on multiple fronts so that when he makes the ask, I'm already stretched." He looked at the folder. "The distribution channel pressure is real?" "Real. Already causing delays." "Let me see the details." She slid the folder across. He opened it and read and felt the particular cold clarity that came over him when a situation crystallized from complex to simple. This was manageable. The channels could be rerouted. The pressure could be absorbed for 4 to 6 weeks before it became genuinely damaging. The other problem was less manageable. "He'll use her," Jun-hyuk said. "Not a question." "If she remains in proximity to you, yes," Hyunmi said. "She becomes a variable he can affect. People she interacts with can be approached. Her research access points can be complicated. If she attracts enough difficulty in her academic work, she becomes a liability you have to decide whether to manage." "Or I remove the variable," he said. Hyunmi was quiet. "That's the clean answer," he said. "It is," she said. He closed the folder. He handed it back. "Give me a few days," he said. Well, he did not see Amara for 4 days. He did not text. He read her one message, sent on the second day, a photo of something she'd found in the archive with the caption, "Yongsan, 1996. Look at the signatures." And he did not respond to it. On the morning of the 5th day, she called him. He let it ring through, looked at the missed call, put the phone face down on his desk. 20 minutes later, a text arrived. "I'm going to assume you're busy, and not that I somehow offended you, but if it's the second one, I'd prefer to know." He picked up the phone, put it down again. Dowan knocked and entered. "The afternoon schedule?" "Clear it," Jun-hyuk said. Dowan looked at him. "All of it?" "The 2 o'clock can move to Friday. Cancel the 4:30. Keep the 6. "Should I ask why?" "No," Jun-hyuk said. He picked up his phone and called her back. She answered on the first ring. "Hi." "I wasn't offended," he said. "I've been dealing with something." "Okay," she said. The word was careful. Not closed, but not open either. Waiting. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "In person." A pause. "How serious is it?" "Serious enough that I didn't want to have it over text." Another pause. "Should I be worried?" He thought about the honest answer to that question. He thought about what Hyunmi had said. He thought about the night on the front steps and the look on Amara's face when she'd said, "I know that too." "Yes," he said, but not for the reason you think. She met him at a small restaurant in Mapo that he kept for exactly these kinds of conversations. A private room in the back, a proprietor who understood the meaning of discretion, no windows visible from the street. He was there first. She arrived 7 minutes later in a dark coat he hadn't seen before, her bag over her shoulder, and sat across from him without touching the menu. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not everything. Not the full mechanics of what Hyunmi had described, not the specifics of Lee Changmin or the distribution channel pressure, but the essential truth that someone had been watching her, that it was connected to him, and that the connection between them had made her visible in a way that could affect her safety and her work. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So what are you telling me?" she said. "That you want to stop?" "I'm telling you the situation so you can decide," he said. "You could have made the decision for me," she said. "You didn't have to tell me at all. You could have just pulled back and given me a reason that didn't involve any of this." "I know. So why didn't you?" He looked at her across the small table. The room was quiet. The light was low. She had her hands flat on the table and she was looking at him with that steady, undivided attention that he had stopped trying to get used to. "Because you told me you prefer to know," he said, "when something is the second thing and not the first." Her breath shifted slightly. He caught it, the small involuntary adjustment, the way her jaw tightened for just a moment before she controlled it. "That was a different conversation," she said. "Same principle," he said. She looked down at her hands, looked back up. "What do you want me to do?" she said. "That's what I'm asking you," he said. "What do you want to do?" She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the room, the restaurant's ambient sound moved quietly. Voices, the clink of something in a kitchen, the muffled texture of an ordinary evening. "I want to keep going," she said. "With the research, with—" She stopped, chose the word carefully. "With the conversations." "That has a cost," he said. "I know." "You don't know the full cost yet," he said. "Then tell me the rest of it," she said. "All of it. Whatever you held back just now." He looked at her. He had not intended to go further. He had laid out the essential structure specifically so she could make a decision without needing to hold information she might rather not have. But she was asking, directly, with her eyes on him and her hands steady on the table and no performance of anything, just the request. And the thing that had been accumulating in him over the past weeks, the thing he had refused to name, that he had categorized as pressure valves and interesting variables in professional contexts, that thing moved in him now like a fault line that had just found its fracture point. He opened his mouth to speak, and the door to the private room opened. Not a knock, not a signal. The door simply opened, and a man Jun Hyuk had not seen in 4 years stepped into the room with 2 people behind him and a smile that had never once in all the time Jun Hyuk had known him meant anything good. Lee Changmin was 53, lean, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and he looked at Jun Hyuk with the particular expression of a man who believed he had just walked in at the exact right moment. Then he looked at Amara. "Kang Jun Hyuk," he said pleasantly, "I heard you developed some interesting new associations." Jun Hyuk did not move, did not look at Amara, did not give Changmin the satisfaction of seeing any adjustment in his expression. "You should have called," Jun Hyuk said. "I did try," Changmin said. "You've been difficult to reach." He pulled out a chair from the near wall and sat down without being invited, his 2 men staying at the door. "I thought we might as well speak directly. It's more efficient." "It's also rude," Jun Hyuk said. "You walked into a private conversation." "I did," Changmin said. He looked at Amara again. The look was not threatening, which was somehow worse. It was simply assessing, cataloging, filing. "I apologize to your companion." He said it in Korean first, then in slow, deliberate English. "I apologize for the interruption. I won't take much of your time." Amara said nothing. She looked at Changmin with the same expression she had used on Jun Hyuk the first morning in the cafe. Direct, assessing, not flinching. Changmin turned back to Jun Hyuk. "I want to discuss the 3 distribution points in Incheon," he said. "I think you know which ones. I think we can reach an arrangement that works for both of us without the current friction." This is not the time or the place, Junhyuk said. I know, Changmin said. That's precisely the point. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and smiled again. Think of this as a demonstration of access. His eyes went briefly to Amara, and of what proximity to you creates for the people around you. He left. Both men at the door followed. The room was quiet again. Junhyuk sat completely still. Underneath the stillness, something was moving that he did not have a clean name for. Not anger. Anger was simple, and this was not simple. This was the specific, pressurized feeling of understanding that a situation had moved beyond the point where careful decisions could hold it. He looked at Amara. She was looking at the door. Then she turned to him. Her face was controlled, but he could see the breath moving through her differently now. Faster, shallower, the chest tightening the way it did when a body had registered a threat before the mind had finished processing it. He came here to show you that he knew, she said. Yes. And to show you what he could do with that knowledge. Yes. She was quiet. Her hands on the table were still flat, but he could see now that the stillness was work. She was holding herself there deliberately. That man is going to use me, she said. Against you. He's going to try, Junhyuk said. What's the difference? He looked at her. The answer to that question lived in a long and complicated history that he could not compress into a restaurant conversation. It lived in 9 years of reading threats and moving faster than the people who made them. It lived in the specific knowledge that Lee Changmin was a man who played elaborate games and almost always won them, except for the times he had miscalculated what his opponent was willing to sacrifice. What Changmin had walked in to demonstrate was that Junhyuk had something to lose now. What Changmin did not yet understand was what Junhyuk was prepared to do about it. The difference, Junhyuk said quietly, is that I know what's coming. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face had changed. Not fear, not anger, but something harder and more settled. The expression of a person who has just understood that a decision they made is going to cost more than they budgeted for and has decided to pay it anyway. So do I, she said. He looked at her across the table in the quiet room, the remnants of an interrupted evening between them, Lee Changmin's smile still hanging in the air like smoke. He had told himself for weeks that this was containable, that he could manage the proximity, that the calculations he ran on everything else in his life could be run on this too, and the numbers would come out clean. Sitting across from Amara Whitfield in a restaurant in Mapo, watching her decide to stay despite everything he'd just shown her, Kang Junhyuk understood with total clarity that the numbers were not going to come out clean. They were already too far in. And for the first time in 9 years of running an empire on the principle that nothing could reach him, he had absolutely no idea whether that was a catastrophe or the one true thing he had ever allowed himself. The drive back from Mapo took 19 minutes. Junhyuk sat in the back of the car and did not speak. Do-hwan was in the passenger seat and had the intelligence to stay quiet. The city moved past the windows in its usual indifferent way. Lights, traffic, the compressed energy of Seoul at night doing what it always did, which was continue without asking anyone's permission. He was thinking about the smile. Lee Changmin had many weapons in his operational inventory, and he used most of them with considerable skill, but the smile was the one Junhyuk had always found most instructive. It appeared in specific contexts. It appeared when Changmin had already won something and wanted the other person to know it before they had figured it out themselves. It was the smile of a man who had been 3 moves ahead long enough that he had stopped bothering to hide it. He had worn that smile in the restaurant tonight, which meant he had not come simply to demonstrate access. He had come because something was already in motion that Junhyuk had not yet seen, and the visit had been a performance of confidence, not a threat. Threats came from people who were uncertain. Changmin had not been uncertain. "Pull Hyun-mi," Junhyuk said. Do-hwan picked up his phone. "Tonight," Junhyuk said. Oh. Hyun-mi arrived at the Gangnam office at 12:40 a.m., wearing the expression of a person who had not been asleep, but who had been doing something else that she would now have to set aside. She sat across from Junhyuk at the long table and opened her tablet without preamble. Changmin came in person, Junhyuk said. Unannounced. Private restaurant in Mapo. Hyunmi's eyes moved. Which location? The Mapo one. He watched her. You already knew he was moving. I knew he was building toward contact, she said. I didn't know he was going to make it personal. He made it personal, Junhyuk said. He walked in while I was with Amara Whitfield, and he looked at her the way someone looks at something they've already decided to use. He paused. I need to know what he has. That's what I've been working on since our conversation this week, she said. I've been careful about how I run the inquiry because if he's monitoring our intelligence channels, which I believe he is, at least partially, I didn't want to show him that we were looking. What have you found so far? She pulled something up on her tablet and slid it across the table. He looked at it. It was a financial document, corporate registry records, acquisition histories, a chain of ownership that ran through 4 companies before arriving at a name he recognized. He went still. When did this happen? He said. The final acquisition completed 6 weeks ago, Hyunmi said. It was structured to look like a routine asset consolidation within the education sector. The company at the end of the ownership chain was the Cultural Research Initiative, the one that funded Amara's fellowship, the one that had brought her to Seoul. Lee Changmin had bought it. Not loudly, not in a way that would register on any surface scan, but he had moved through a series of holding structures and shell acquisitions over the course of 8 months, and 6 weeks ago, 3 weeks before Amara Whitfield had arrived in Seoul, he had completed a controlling stake in the organization that was paying for her to be here. Junhyuk read the document twice. He was aware of his own breathing. He was aware of the table under his hands. He was aware of Hyunmi watching him with the particular quality of attention that she reserved for moments when she was gauging how her principal would respond to information that changed the shape of everything. He knew she was coming, Junhyuk said. He would have had access to all fellowship participant information once the acquisition was complete, Hyunmi said. Names, research focus, arrival dates, university affiliations. So he knew a Black American graduate student with a fellowship to study urban development was arriving in Seoul 3 weeks after he took control of the funding organization. He put the tablet down. And somehow she ends up in the same cafe as me on her first week here. Hyunmi said nothing. The coffee, he said. The word landed in the room and neither of them moved for a moment. I can't confirm the cafe encounter was arranged, Hyunmi said carefully. It's possible it was genuine chance. The probability of a deliberate setup of that specificity is exactly the kind of thing Changmin would consider worth the effort, Junhyuk said. He stood. He walked to the window. 14 floors below, the city continued its indifferent performance. He looked at it and felt something moving through him that he could not immediately categorize because it was not a feeling he had much experience with. It was not anger, though there was anger in it. It was not the cold clarity of operational crisis management, though that was present too. It was the particular sensation of having been a fool. He had prided himself for 9 years on reading situations correctly, on seeing through structures to the mechanisms underneath, on never being the person in the room who did not know what game was being played. He had built an entire organization on the principle that information was the only true power, and that the person who controlled the information controlled everything else. And he had sat across from Amara Whitfield in a cafe and decided she was interesting and harmless, and then spent the next several weeks having conversations with her about urban development and Korean history and the specific texture of her precise, undivided attention. While Lee Changmin watched, has she been reporting to him? The question came out flat. He did not turn from the window. I don't have evidence of that, Hyunmi said, but you don't have evidence she hasn't. A pause. No, I don't. He pressed one hand against the window glass and felt the cold of it against his palm. Outside, a line of taillights stretched down toward Gangnam Daero, red and patient. I need you to go deeper, he said. Her communications, her research contacts, every person she's spoken to in Seoul since she arrived. I need to know if there's any thread connecting her to Changmin's network directly. That will take several days to do properly. Then start tonight. Hyunmi stood. She gathered her tablet and paused at the door. And in the meantime? He turned from the window. His face had settled back into the surface he used for everything. the controlled composure that Do-won had once described as looking calmer in a crisis than in a meeting. In the meantime, he said, I don't see her. The 3 days that followed were the most focused he had been in months, which told him something he did not particularly want to know. He threw himself into the organization's operational problems with the complete attention that had been, lately, slightly divided. The Incheon distribution pressure Changmin had been applying turned out to be solvable. 2 of the 3 affected channels could be rerouted through alternative partners with a short-term cost that was manageable, and the 3rd could be temporarily suspended without significant impact. He dealt with it methodically, thoroughly, without the usual background noise. On the 2nd day, Amara texted, I'm getting the sense that something changed after the restaurant. I'm not going to push, but I want you to know I'm not fragile. Whatever it is, you can tell me. He read it, did not respond. On the 3rd day, she called. He let it go to voicemail. She did not leave one. On the morning of the 4th day, Hyunmi came back. She sat across from him and looked at her tablet for a moment before she looked at him. He had learned over 11 years of working with her that the preliminary gesture, the look at the tablet before the look at him, meant what she was about to say was going to require management. Her communications are clean, Hyunmi said. No direct contact with Changmin's network, no unusual financial transfers, no secondary phone or device. Her research contacts are all legitimate academic sources. She paused. She is exactly what she says she is. He absorbed this. The fellowship acquisition, he said. Could be coincidental, Hyunmi said. Changmin has been acquiring education and cultural sector assets across the board for 18 months as part of a legitimization strategy. The research initiative was one of 7 similar organizations. It's possible the fellowship participants were irrelevant to the acquisition rationale. And the cafe encounter? Cafe Onyx has a high concentration of professional and academic clientele in the early morning. She's been there 3 times since the initial encounter. I have surveillance confirmation. It's consistent with a genuine preference, not with someone running a contact protocol. He was quiet. She didn't know, Hyunmi said. Not softly, just as information. You're certain. I'm certain enough to say it to you directly, she said, which I would not do if I had any remaining doubt. He sat with that for a long moment. 3 days of distance. 3 days of her moving through Seoul, not knowing that the man she'd been meeting with in cafes and apartments and private restaurants had spent 72 hours treating her as a potential threat. 3 days of her sending careful, undramatic messages that said, I'm not fragile and you can tell me, and then, when he didn't respond, saying nothing more because she was the kind of person who meant what she said about not pushing. There's something else, Hyunmi said. He looked at her. She pulled up a new document on the tablet and slid it across. I went back further on the Changmin acquisition chain, past the research initiative. I wanted to understand the full scope of what he's been building in the legitimization sector. She watched him look at the document. And I found something that isn't about Amara Whitfield. He was reading. He stopped at a specific line. Read it again. This is from 7 years ago, he said. Yes. This is an internal transfer record. Yes. He looked up at her. How did you get this? I've been building toward this access for 2 years, she said. I didn't use it until now because I didn't have a reason to. I had a reason. The document in front of him was a financial transfer record from 7 years ago, originating from a shell company that he had recognized immediately, the moment he saw the registration number. The way you recognize the specific shape of something you'd tried to put behind you, and terminating in an account connected to Baekryon's secondary operational fund. The shell company belonged to a man named Kwon Tae-sung, who had been Jun Hyuk's predecessor, who had handed him Baekryon 9 years ago in a transfer that had been framed, at the time, as mentorship in succession, who had died 4 years later of a cardiac event at 61, which everyone in the organization had accepted as the natural conclusion of a hard life. The transfer record was dated 14 months before that death, and the amount, the specific, large, deliberate amount, matched with a precision that was not coincidental the exact sum that Baekryon's secondary operational fund had received in what had been logged, at the time, as a return on a legitimate real estate investment. He turned the tablet over slowly and placed it face down on the table. "You're telling me," he said, and his voice was very quiet, "that Kwon Tae-sung was moving money to Changmin's network 14 months before he died." "I'm telling you, the transfer record shows that connection," Hyunmi said. "What it means? It means Changmin had a relationship with Tae-sung that I didn't know about," Junhyuk said. "A financial relationship during a period when Tae-sung was preparing to hand me the organization." He paused. "Which means Changmin may have known about the succession before I did." Hyunmi was very still. "And if he knew about the succession," Junhyuk continued, working it through with the same flat, methodical precision he applied to everything, because if he stopped being methodical right now, the other thing underneath would surface, and he could not afford that, not here, not yet. "Then he's had 9 years to plan around it. 9 years of watching how I run the organization. 9 years of building toward whatever he's currently building toward. That's consistent with the timeline of his legitimization acquisitions," Hyunmi said. "He started moving into the education and cultural sector 3 years after you took over, which is when you would have been fully consolidated, no longer in a vulnerable transition period. He waited until you were stable before he started building." "Because destabilizing a transitioning organization is messy," Junhyuk said. "You can't control the outcome. But destabilizing an established one, if you know it well enough, if you've watched it long enough, you can engineer the specific kind of pressure that produces the specific outcome you want." "Yes," Hyunmi said. He turned the tablet back over, looked at the transfer record again, looked at Kwon Tae-sung's name at the top of the originating account. The man had found him when he was 22, had pulled him out of a low-level street operation and invested in him, trained him, given him access to a world he would never have reached on his own, had treated him in the specific way that certain powerful men treated certain promising younger ones, as something between a project and a son, had handed him Baekryong at 27 and told him he was ready. He had never once questioned the inheritance. "Who else in the organization might have known about the Taesung-Changmin connection?" he said. Hyunmi looked at the tablet. "That's the part I haven't finished yet," she said. "The transfer record came from a deeper layer than I usually work in, which means either Taesung was exceptionally careful about containing it," she paused, "or someone inside Baekryong has been helping contain it since," he said. The room went silent in a way that rooms rarely went silent. He looked at Oh Hyunmi, 11 years, his most trusted intelligence operative, the woman who had just handed him information that implicated the foundation of everything he'd built. And he felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific chill of not knowing who in the room he could trust. 7. He left the office at 6 in the morning. He did not go home. He had a secondary apartment he kept for situations that required complete separation from his usual environment. No staff, no security beyond the building's standard systems, no one who knew his precise location. He went there, changed clothes, and sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the transfer record that Hyunmi had sent to his encrypted device before he left. He read it 11 times. On the 11th reading, he set the device down and pressed his hands flat against the kitchen table and stayed very still and let himself feel it, the full weight of what the document meant, which was something he had refused to allow in the office because the office required the surface, and right now there was no one here to manage his surface for. Kwon Tae-sung had given him an empire. The empire had been built, in part, on a relationship with his eventual structural rival that Junhyuk had never been told about. He did not know yet what that relationship had produced beyond the transfer record. He did not know whether Taesung had been compromised, coerced, or willing. He did not know whether the succession itself had been engineered by Changmin as a long play. Hand a talented young man a complex organization, let him build it for 9 years, then leverage 9 years of accumulated knowledge about how it operated to take it apart. He did not know whether people inside Baekryong had known and said nothing. He sat with the not knowing and felt it. Then he picked up his phone and called Amara Whitfield. It was 6:17 a.m. She answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the particular texture of someone who had been awake for a while but had not expected the call. "Jun Hyuk." I need to tell you something," he said. A pause. "Okay." I spent 3 days treating you as a potential threat, he said. I had your communications reviewed. I looked for a connection between you and the man who interrupted us in the restaurant. He stopped. Let that land. I found nothing. You are exactly what you say you are. The silence on her end was the specific kind of silence that meant the words had hit something real. You investigated me, she said. Yes. Without telling me. Yes. Another silence. He listened to her breathing, steady, controlled, the sound of someone working very hard to stay inside their own composure. Why are you telling me now? She said. Because I owe you the truth, he said. And because things have become more complicated than they were 2 days ago, and I am not willing to let you navigate that complication without knowing what I did. How much more complicated? She said. Her voice had gone flat in a way he recognized. She was processing, not shutting down, storing the emotional response for later so she could deal with the information first. The organization funding your fellowship, he said. It was acquired 6 weeks ago by the man from the restaurant, Lee Chang-min. The silence this time was longer. He owns my fellowship, she said. The controlling stake in the organization that funds it, he said. It's possible he acquired it with no knowledge of or interest in your specific participation. The acquisition is part of a broader pattern, but I cannot tell you with certainty that your presence in Seoul was not a factor in some part of his planning. He heard her breath catch. Just once. Well, then level again. So I might have been a piece on a board I didn't know existed, she said. It's possible. And you suspected I knew. I suspected I might have been careless, he said, that I had allowed proximity to someone I didn't fully understand. I needed to rule it out. You ruled it out by investigating me instead of asking me. Yes. That's... She stopped. He heard something shift on her end, a movement, a chair, something physical happening as she absorbed and recalibrated. That's what you do, she said finally. Not accusatory, just precise. The same thing she'd said in the restaurant about the coincidence, just assessing the statement and filing the result. It is, he said. And now you're calling me at 6 in the morning to tell me, she said. Not because you have to, because you decided to. Yes. Another silence. Then something happened that he had not anticipated. She laughed. Not a full laugh. A single short exhaled sound that carried a quality he could not immediately name. It was not humor exactly. It was the sound of someone arriving at a conclusion they found absurd and honest at the same time. I'm angry, she said. I know. I'm going to stay angry about it for a while, she said. I want you to know that. That's fair, he said. But I also... She stopped again. He waited. I also want to know the rest of it, she said. Whatever it is you found last night that made you call me at 6 a.m. instead of waiting for a reasonable hour, because you wouldn't call at 6 a.m. for something manageable. He looked at the kitchen table, at the device with the transfer record still glowing on the screen, at the name of a dead man at the top of a document that had reframed 9 years of his life in the span of a single night. Not over the phone, he said. Then come here, she said. I'll put coffee on. He almost said no. The calculated response, the response of a man managing an intelligence crisis with an unknown number of compromised variables, was to keep the circle of information as small as possible until he understood who inside Baekrion might have been sitting on a secret for 9 years. But he was sitting alone in a secondary apartment at 6 in the morning holding a document that had just dismantled the story he had told himself about his own life. And the only person he wanted to talk to was a woman he had spent 3 days suspecting and who had just told him she was going to stay angry about it and then asked him to come over anyway. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. Well, she had the coffee ready when he arrived. She put it on the table and sat across from him and folded her hands and looked at him with the full weight of her attention and did not say anything about the 3 days of silence or the investigation or the 6 a.m. call, because she had apparently already decided that those things would be addressed in their own time, and right now there was something more important. Tell me, she said. He told her about the transfer record. He told her about Kwon Tae-sung. Not the full history, but enough. The mentor, the succession, the organization he had been given at 27. He told her about the connection to Chang Min's network that the record implied, and what that might mean for the 9 years Baekryun had been operating under his leadership without knowing about it. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, filing each piece of information in the precise mental architecture he had come to understand was just how her mind worked. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The person who found the record," she said, "your intelligence operative. Hyunmi." "She's been with you 11 years, Amara said. He had told her that once in passing. She had kept it. "And she just handed you a document that destabilizes everything you've built." She looked at him steadily. "Either she's completely loyal to you, or she's the person who's been containing the secret, and she's decided now is the time to surface it." He looked at her. "Those are the only two possibilities," she said. "And you know that, which is why you're sitting in my kitchen at 6 in the morning instead of in your office." He said nothing. "You don't know which one she is," Amara said. "No," he said. She absorbed that. She reached forward and picked up her coffee cup and held it in both hands and looked at the table for a moment. The morning light was coming through the window behind her, flat and gray, the same quality it had been the first morning in the cafe. "If she's loyal, you have an ally and a critical piece of intelligence," Amara said. If she's not, then I handed her confirmation of how much I know," Junhyuk said, "and she's already making a call I can't intercept." The words settled between them. Outside, Seoul was doing what it did, continuing, indifferent, enormous, full of people running their own calculations in their own rooms at 6 in the morning. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from Doan, flagged urgent. Hyunmi's device went dark 40 minutes ago. Car found outside the office. No contact. He read it twice. Put the phone down on the table with careful, deliberate control. Amara watched his face. She did not ask. She waited. He looked up at her and said the only true thing he had left to say in that moment, which was also the thing he had never said to another living person in 9 years of running an empire. "I don't know what to do next," he said. Amara set down her coffee cup. "Yes, you do," she said quietly. "You just don't want to do it alone." And for the first time in the entire architecture of his careful, controlled, armored life, Kang Jun-hyuk did not have an answer for that, because she was exactly right. And the fact that she was right meant that everything he had believed about what he needed to survive had just been proven wrong by a woman sitting across from him in a small apartment in Seoul, with morning coffee going cold between them and the walls finally, irrevocably, coming down. He made 3 calls in the next 11 minutes, sitting at Amara's kitchen table with the coffee going cold and the morning light pressing flat through the window. The first call was to Doan. He told him to pull every person currently inside the Gangnam office into one room and hold them there. No phones, no external communication, no exceptions. Dohwan didn't ask questions. That was why Junhyuk had kept him for 7 years. The second call was to a man named Park In-soo, who ran Baekryon's external security contracts and reported to no one inside the organization's internal hierarchy except Jun-hyuk directly. Park In-soo was the specific kind of person who existed in the margins of organizations like Baekryun, not loyal to structure, not loyal to reputation, loyal to the single individual who had once pulled him out of a situation that would otherwise have ended his life. He picked up on the first ring and said nothing, just listened. And when Jun-hyuk gave him 3 addresses and a description, he said 40 minutes and hung up. The third call was to Oh Hyun-mi's personal emergency line, a number that bypassed every standard communication channel, a number that only 3 people in the world had. It rang 7 times. No answer. He set the phone down. Amara had not moved from her chair across the table. She was watching him with the focused, still quality she used when she was processing something complex. Not frozen, just internal, running through it. "Hyun-mi," she said. "Her device is dark. Her car is at the office. No one has seen her in 40 minutes. He looked at the phone. "Which means either she's been taken or she left voluntarily. If she left voluntarily, then she handed me the transfer record to provoke a specific reaction and is now reporting that reaction to someone." He paused. "Chang Min's people. Or someone inside the organization who's been managing the Taesung connection since before I took over." "Someone who knew you'd pick up your phone and call her after reading it," Amara said. Yes. And if she was taken? Then whatever she found last night was close enough to something someone needed to stay buried that they moved before she could bring me more of it. Amara absorbed this. Either way, she said, someone inside your organization knows where the pressure points are. Yes. She got up. She went to the counter, poured the cold coffee out, and started a new pot with the efficient, unhurried movements of a person who processed stress by keeping their hands occupied. He watched her and felt something he did not have a clean name for. The specific sensation of being seen clearly by someone in a moment when he could not fully see himself. You can't go back to the Gangnam office, she said, her back to him, watching the coffee begin to drip. No. Because if there's someone inside who's been containing this for 9 years, walking back in there right now, in the middle of this, before you know who it is walking into a room where someone already knows my next move, he said. She turned around. So where do you go? He looked at her. I need to get to Changmin directly, he said. Not through channels, not through the kind of meeting he engineers for maximum psychological advantage, before he knows I'm coming. She looked at him carefully. You just said you don't know which of your people to trust. I know two, he said. Dowan and Park In-soo. That's enough? It's what I have. She held his gaze. He could see her running it. The risk calculus, the variables, the specific texture of a situation where the options were all bad and the question was only which bad option was survivable. What do you need from me? She said. Nothing, he said. I need you to stay here. Don't contact anyone connected to the fellowship. Don't go to the archive. Junhyuk, Changmin controls the organization funding your research, he said. Until I know the full scope of what he knows about you and what he intends to do with it, you are safer in this apartment than anywhere else in Seoul. She looked at him for a long moment. You're not asking, she said. No, he said. I'm telling you. Because I am not capable of doing what I need to do next if I'm also calculating your exposure at the same time. He stopped. The words had come out more directly than he intended. He felt the rawness of them in the air between them and did not try to take them back. Her expression shifted. Something moved through it that he couldn't fully read, something that was not quite surprise and not quite relief, and existed somewhere in the gap between them. Okay, she said quietly. He stood, put his phone in his jacket. Jun Hyuk, she said his name with a weight that made him stop. He turned. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and stood directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the exact quality of her focus, the particular intensity she reserved for things that mattered and that she intended to say only once. Come back from this, she said. Not be careful. Not good luck. Not the decorative language people used when they were frightened but didn't want to admit the size of what they were frightened about. Just that. Direct, unadorned. The way she said everything. He looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually lasted. I will, he said. He left. Park In-soo was waiting in a gray sedan 2 blocks from Amara's building when Jun Hyuk came down. He got in the back without speaking. In-soo handed him a burner phone and a folder without turning around. Changmin's current location, Jun Hyuk said. Private residence in Seongbuk-dong. He's been there since 11 last night. 2 external security teams, 1 internal. Standard rotation. In-soo paused. He's not expecting a visit. Good. We doing this quiet? We're doing this conversation, Jun Hyuk said. 1 man in, you on the perimeter. I go in, I talk to him, I come out. In-soo was quiet for a beat. And if it doesn't go that cleanly, then it doesn't go that cleanly, Jun Hyuk said. Drive. Changmin's residence was a traditional Hanok property that had been extensively renovated. High walls, a wooden gate with contemporary security panels, a narrow approach road that gave the external guards a clear sightline in both directions. Jun Hyuk sat in the car half a block away and looked at it through the window, while In-soo ran the security rotation 1 more time. 22 minutes between the outer gate check and the side perimeter sweep, In-soo said. Long enough. You sure about the 1-man approach? If I go in with people, he sees a threat, Jun Hyuk said. I go in alone, he sees either confidence or desperation. Either one gives me a few minutes of conversation before he decides how to respond. And if he decides fast, Then we find out something useful about how prepared he actually is. Insu looked at him in the rearview mirror. You want me to say it's a bad idea? I want you to tell me if the rotation timing is accurate. It's accurate, Insu said. Junhyuk got out of the car. He went in at the side approach, past the gap in the perimeter sweep, with the particular quality of physical control that came from having learned, in his early years inside the organization, how to move through spaces where he was not supposed to be. His heart rate was elevated. He was aware of it, the way he was aware of his own breathing, the slight tightness across the chest that adrenaline produced. But elevated was useful. Elevated was fuel. The panic version of this feeling was something he had trained out of himself over a long time. What remained was the functional version, the body telling the mind this matters, pay attention, and the mind saying, I know, now be still. He came through the side garden and onto the inner courtyard before the first interior guard saw him. The guard reached for his radio. Tell Changmin that Kang Jun-hyuk is in his garden, Jun-hyuk said, in a voice calibrated precisely for the distance between them, clear enough to be understood, quiet enough not to carry further. And that I came alone. The guard stared at him. Go, Jun-hyuk said. The guard went. Jun-hyuk stood in the courtyard and looked at the interior of the property. The careful aesthetic of the renovation, traditional roof lines against contemporary glass panels, a stone garden to the left, a light burning in a room at the far end. He stood completely still and waited and felt his heartbeat and did not move. 2 minutes later, Lee Changmin appeared in the doorway of the lit room, wearing a silk robe over dark clothes, his expression carrying the look of a man who had been awake all night and was not surprised by this development. That last part told Jun-hyuk something important. You knew I was coming, Jun-hyuk said. I thought you might, Changmin said. Come inside, it's cold. Walked. The room was a study. Books, a long desk, 2 chairs near a low table with a tea service that was fresh, recently set. Changmin sat in one chair and indicated the other. Jun-hyuk sat, because standing would communicate something he didn't want to communicate, and he had not come here to perform strength. He had come here for information. You and me, he said. She's safe, Changmin said. He poured tea into both cups with the measured calm of a man who had prepared for this scene. She came to me voluntarily. When? Last night, after she gave you the transfer record. He picked up his cup. She's been in contact with my people for approximately 3 months. She came to us after she concluded that certain things inside Baekryun were unlikely to be resolved internally. Certain things, Jun-hyuk said. The Taesung connection, Changmin said. She found it on her own about 8 months ago. She spent 5 months trying to understand what it meant before she concluded she needed an outside perspective. Jun-hyuk looked at him. And she came to you. She came to someone connected to me, Changmin said. We were careful about the directness of the contact. She had conditions. What conditions? That whatever came next, you were not permanently damaged by it. Changmin set his cup down. She is loyal to you. I want to be clear about that. Her decision to contact my network was not a betrayal of you. It was, in her assessment, the only way to surface what she'd found without triggering exactly the kind of internal crisis you're currently managing. Jun-hyuk was quiet for a moment. He looked at the tea on the table in front of him and did not touch it, and felt the specific texture of this moment. Sitting in his structural rival's study at 7 in the morning, being told that the person he trusted most had run a parallel operation inside his organization for 3 months. The transfer record, he said. You knew what it showed before she gave it to me. Yes. You could have surfaced it yourself, he said. At any point in the last several years, if you had access to this information, you could have used it against me. I could have, Changmin said. Why didn't you? Changmin looked at him with an expression that Jun-hyuk found difficult to read. Not the smile from the restaurant, not calculation. Something more complicated. The expression of a man looking at a longer truth than the immediate situation required. Because what Taesung did has nothing to do with what you built, Changmin said. You didn't know about the connection. You inherited an organization that had a buried relationship with my network without knowing it existed. Using that against you would have been, he paused, inaccurate. Inaccurate, Jun-hyuk repeated. You are not Kwon Taesung, Changmin said. You are a different kind of problem entirely. Something in the delivery of that sentence made Jun Hyuk go still. What does that mean? He said. Chungmin stood. He walked to the desk and opened a drawer and came back with a folder, thicker than the one Hyunmi had shown Jun Hyuk, considerably thicker, and set it on the low table between them. Taesung came to me 14 months before his death, Changmin said. Not to negotiate, not to align our networks. He came to me because he was dying and he knew it. The cardiac condition was already advanced, and he was trying to arrange certain things before he died. He sat back down. One of those things was ensuring that whatever came after him didn't inherit a completely clean slate. Jun Hyuk looked at the folder, did not touch it. He didn't trust succession, Changmin continued. He had seen too many organizations collapse when the founding figure died and left everything to a single successor. He wanted insurance, a way to ensure that the person who took over Baekryun would always have a reason to stay measured, to not overreach. He wanted leverage held against his own successor, Jun Hyuk said. He asked me to hold it, Changmin said, in exchange for the transfer. The silence in the room was very complete. He paid you to hold leverage against me, Jun Hyuk said, before he even told me I was taking over. Yes. And you've been holding it for 9 years. Yes. What's in the folder? Changmin looked at him steadily. Everything that Taesung wanted me to have, financial records, operational documents, decisions made in the early years of Baekryun that were attributed to the organization's clean accounts, but originated in processes you were never told about. He paused. Nothing that implicates you personally. Everything that implicates the organization's foundations. If that became public, Baekryun's legitimate business interests would be exposed to significant regulatory and legal pressure, Changmin said. The companies you've built over 9 years, well, the clean ones, the ones you were careful about, would survive. But the structural foundations would not. Jun Hyuk looked at the folder on the table, looked at the man across from him. You came to the restaurant last night, he said. You came in and looked at Amara and smiled and walked out. That wasn't a threat. That was a signal. It was an invitation, Changmin said, to this conversation. I've been trying to have this conversation with you for 2 years, Changmin said, through appropriate channels, through intermediaries. You're exceptionally good at not receiving messages you haven't decided to receive. Jun Hyuk felt something move through him. Not anger, because the anger had run through and out already somewhere in the drive from Amara's apartment, but a kind of scorched clarity, the feeling of a landscape after something burning has passed through it, and what remains is just the ground, bare and true. What do you want? He said. The Incheon channels, Changmin said. Full operational alignment on the Northern Distribution Network. Joint structure, split revenue, my people integrated into your logistics at the mid-management level. That's been your ask for 2 years, Jun Hyuk said. It's a reasonable ask, Changmin said. The Incheon network is currently operating at 60% efficiency because we are both running parallel infrastructure in the same geographic corridor. Combined, it operates at 90 plus. That benefits both organizations more than the current competition does. And the folder, Jun Hyuk said. Goes away, Changmin said. Completely. Whatever Taesung paid me to hold, I return to you. The obligation was to him, not to the leverage. He's been dead for 5 years. Jun Hyuk looked at the folder, the thing 9 years of his life were built on top of, the thing that could expose the foundations to light. They were not constructed to withstand. The legacy of a man who had given him everything and in doing so had quietly made sure he could never fully own it. And Hyunmi, he said. Comes back when you say she comes back, Changmin said. She's not here under duress. She came because she needed to understand what I intended to do with what she'd found. She needed to know you weren't going to be destroyed by it. Is that what she told you? 11 years, Changmin said. That woman has been protecting you from things you didn't know existed. The least you can do is understand that what she did was not a betrayal. Jun Hyuk sat very still for a long moment. The tea on the table had stopped steaming. Outside the study window, Seoul was completing its transition from night to morning. The light changing at the edges, the gray softening toward something more honest. He thought about the moment in Amara's kitchen when he'd said, "I don't know what to do next." He thought about what she'd said back. "You just don't want to do it alone." "I need 48 hours, he said. Changmin looked at him. "For what?" "To verify independently that what you're offering matches what you're describing," Junhyuk said. "I don't sign agreements I haven't read." Changmin almost smiled. Not the smile from the restaurant, something smaller and more genuine. "That's reasonable," he said. "And I need Hyunmi back in the next hour," Junhyuk said. "Whatever she needs to tell me, she tells me directly, not through you." "She'll be at your secondary residence in 40 minutes, Changmin said. Junhyuk stood. He picked up the folder from the table and held it in one hand and looked at Changmin across the low table in the early morning quiet of the study. "One question," he said. "Ask it." "Amara Whitfield," he said. "The fellowship acquisition? Was she relevant to your planning?" Changmin met his gaze. "The fellowship organization was relevant," he said. "She was not. I didn't know anything specific about her until my people flagged the surveillance response." He paused. "She called you the night she was followed. You had people at her building in 7 minutes. I've been watching you for 9 years, Junhyuk. You have never moved that fast for anything that wasn't critical." Junhyuk said nothing. "She's not a piece on my board," Changmin said. "I want you to understand that clearly. Whatever she is to you, I had no intention of touching it." Junhyuk looked at him for a moment longer. 48 hours, he said. He walked out of the study, through the courtyard, back through the side garden, and out onto the narrow approach road where the morning air hit him cold and clean across the face. His phone buzzed in his jacket, a text from an unknown number that resolved, when he opened it, as a message from Hyunmi's secondary device. "I'm sorry I didn't come to you first. I didn't know how much he already had. I was trying to protect you from a direction you couldn't see." He stood on the road and read it twice. Then he typed back, "Secondary residence, 40 minutes. Come alone." He put the phone away and stood in the cold morning air with the folder under one arm and Seoul opening up around him into its full daylight self. The sounds of the city expanding, the light going from gray to white, everything continuing in the enormous, indifferent way it always did. He had 48 hours to verify an agreement with a man he had spent 9 years treating as a rival, make a decision about the Incheon network, and determine what to do with the knowledge that the foundation of everything he'd built had been quietly compromised by a dead man's insurance policy before he'd ever had a chance to make it his own. He thought about the folder, about what Taesung had wanted when he'd arranged for someone outside the organization to hold the weight of it. Control. Even from the grave. The specific need of men who had spent their lives controlling everything to ensure that the control didn't simply vanish when they did. He understood it. He had built an organization on a version of the same instinct. He also understood, standing in the morning cold outside Lee Changmin's property, that it had failed. Not because the leverage wasn't real, it was. Not because the exposure risk wasn't genuine, it was. It had failed because the specific person Taesung had chosen as his successor had spent the last several weeks having his carefully maintained control dismantled not by an enemy or a rival or a document in a folder, but by the single human experience he had spent 9 years making sure he never had. He started walking toward Insu's car. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number he knew. Amara. He stopped walking, looked at the screen. A text sent 2 minutes ago. "I know you said stay here. I'm staying, but I need you to know something, so I'm saying it now instead of later, because later might be complicated." A pause. Then the next message. "I'm not here because I ended up in your world by accident. I did. But I stayed in it on purpose. I want you to know the difference." He stood in the morning cold and read it 3 times. His chest was doing something that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with a truth he had been running calculations around for weeks trying to find a clean way to name. And here it was in 2 text messages, plain and direct and completely without decoration, the way she said everything. He started typing a response. His phone rang before he could finish it. Do-won. Flagged critical. He picked up. "What?" "The 3 Incheon channel managers," Do-won said. his voice carrying the specific tight quality of someone delivering information they had verified twice before transmitting. All three just received simultaneous contact from an external source offering to buy out their contracts. Same offer, same timing, same source. Changmin? Junhyuk said. No, Do-won said. The source traces back through 2 layers to a name I didn't expect. Junhyuk waited. Seo Yuna, Do-won said. The name landed like a flat stone dropped into standing water. Small impact, large ripple. Seo Yuna, whom he had not thought about in this context, in any context involving Baekryon's operational infrastructure, because Seo Yuna was a business partner in the legitimate sector, connected to 3 of his clean companies through standard commercial agreements, and had never, in 2 years of professional association, given him any reason to locate her inside the operational side of what he ran. You're certain, Junhyuk said. Third verification completed 2 minutes ago, Do-won said. I'm certain. He stood in the road with the folder under one arm and Amara's unfinished text on the screen in Lee Changmin's study at his back, and felt the specific sensation of a situation that had just expanded beyond the perimeter he thought he'd drawn around it. Changmin had told him Amara was not a piece on his board. He had believed it. He had not thought to ask about Seo Yuna. And now 3 of his distribution managers were being simultaneously approached by a woman who had no reason to know they existed, with an offer timed precisely to the moment when Junhyuk was standing in a rival's garden at 7 in the morning with his attention divided and his inner circle fractured and his walls, for the first time in 9 years, genuinely down. Get everyone to the secondary location, he said to Do-won. All 3 channel managers in person within the hour. Nobody communicates with Seo Yuna's representatives until I'm in the room. Understood. And Do-won? Yeah. Tell me you haven't responded to anything from her network today, he said. A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. Do-won, he said very quietly. She reached out to me 6 hours ago, Do-won said, before I knew about the channel managers. She said it was about the Gangnam office lease renewal. I didn't connect it. What did you tell her? Nothing operational, Do-won said. I told her you were handling something and would be unavailable until afternoon. Unavailable until afternoon, which meant Seo Yuna's network knew he was occupied, distracted, and unlikely to be monitoring secondary channels for the next several hours. The window wasn't 48 hours anymore. It had already started closing. 20 minutes, Junhyuk said. Secondary location. Everyone. He hung up and stood in the cold morning road for exactly 3 seconds. Then he walked fast to the car, got in, and said to Park In-soo the only thing there was left to say. Drive. The secondary location was a converted warehouse space in Seongdong-gu that Junhyuk had acquired 4 years ago through a clean commercial entity and had never used for anything that connected back to Baekryon's operational structure. That was the point of it. He arrived 11 minutes after calling Do-hwan. Park In-soo pulled into the loading bay and cut the engine, and Jun Hyuk was out of the car before it fully stopped, moving through the side entrance with the folder still under his arm and the specific physical tension of a man who has been awake for over 24 hours, running on the chemical fuel of necessity, and has not yet allowed himself to acknowledge it. Do-won was inside with 4 men Jun Hyuk trusted at the operational level. The 3 Incheon channel managers, Han Gi-tae, Cho Myung-soo, and a younger man named Ryu Seong-bin, who had been managing the northern corridor for 18 months, were seated at a metal table in the center of the open floor. They looked the way men looked when they had been pulled from their morning routines without explanation and brought somewhere unfamiliar by people who did not explain things. Alert, controlled, trying not to show that they were calculating exits. Jun Hyuk set the folder on the table and looked at all 3 of them. Tell me exactly what the offer said, he said, word for word. Han Gi-tae, the oldest of the 3, spoke first. He was 54, had been managing the central Incheon corridor for 6 years, and had the steady, weathered quality of a man who had seen enough to know when a situation required precision over brevity. He laid out the offer in clean, accurate language. A contract buyout at 140% of current compensation, a transition timeline of 30 days, and a guarantee of operational continuity under new management. No mention of who the new management was. No direct attribution to any organization. Just a clean offer from a clean intermediary, delivered with the kind of professional courtesy that was itself a signal. Because people who needed to hide what they were doing did not communicate this carefully unless they were very confident in their position. Cho Myung-soo and Ryu Seongbin confirmed the same offer, same language, same timing, within a 6-minute window across all 3 contacts. Coordinated, precise, the kind of precision that required either significant advance preparation or access to internal scheduling information that told you exactly when all 3 men would be reachable and when their primary contact, meaning Jun Hyuk, would not be monitoring secondary channels. "Did any of you respond?" Jun Hyuk said. "No," Giti said. The other 2 shook their heads. "Did any of you recognize the intermediary?" Gite hesitated. That hesitation was a data point. "Gite," Jun Hyuk said. "The communication came through a contact I've worked with before," Gite said. "In a legitimate context, import licensing, 3 years ago, before I was managing the Incheon corridor." He paused. "The contact works for a company connected to Seo Yuna's commercial network." Jun Hyuk looked at him. "You've had prior dealings with Seo Yuna's network." "Legitimate dealings," Gitai said, and the word legitimate carried the specific weight of a man who understood the distinction and was being very careful about which side of it he was standing on. 3 years ago, before you moved into your current role." "Yes." Jun Hyuk was quiet for a moment. He looked at the 3 men at the table and ran the calculation. Not the paranoid version, not the version that assumed contamination simply because contact had occurred, but the honest version, which asked whether the contact was coincidental or whether Seo Yuna had specifically positioned her network adjacent to Baekryon's Incheon corridor over a period of years, using legitimate commercial relationships as proximity, waiting for a moment to apply pressure. The answer was obvious, and had been obvious for the last 40 minutes. He simply hadn't known to look until now. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're all going to stay here for the next 3 hours. You're going to have no external communication during that time. At the end of 3 hours, I will have spoken with Seo Yuna directly, and I will know whether what she's offering is a negotiating position or a declaration." He looked at each of them in turn. "If it's a negotiating position, we manage it internally and you go home. If it's a declaration, I'll need your answers about where you stand. But I won't ask that question until I know which one it is, because it's not a fair question to ask a man when the situation is still unclear." Gitti looked at him. "And if we'd already answered her?" "You didn't," Jun Hyuk said. "But if we had?" Jun Hyuk met his gaze. "Then we'd be having a different conversation," he said. "But we're not. So." He picked up the folder and walked to the far end of the warehouse where Do-won was standing with his phone and the particular posture of a man who had information he had been waiting for the right moment to deliver. "Yuna," Jun Hyuk said quietly. "She's at her office in Yeouido," Do-won said. "She's been there since 8 a.m. She's not hiding." "She's not hiding because she doesn't think she needs to," Jun Hyuk said. "She thinks I'm occupied with Changmin." He handed Do-won the folder. "Lock this here. Nobody touches it until I'm back." "You're going to Yeouido alone?" "I'm going with Insu," Jun Hyuk said. "And I'm going now, before she recalibrates." He was at the door when Do-won said his name. He turned. Do-won looked at him with the expression he used when he was about to say something that fell outside his usual operational communication, something personal, which was rare enough from Do-won that it carried weight. "The thing with Hyunmi," Do-won said. "What she did." "I know," Jun Hyuk said. "She was protecting you from a blind side." "I know that too," Jun Hyuk said. "We'll talk about it when this is done." Seo Yuna's office occupied the top floor of a commercial building in Yeouido that she owned outright, one of 4 properties her company held in the financial district, all of them clean, all of them generating legitimate revenue from legitimate tenants, all of them part of the careful architecture of a woman who had spent 12 years building the kind of credibility that made people stop asking certain questions. She was standing at the window when Jun Hyuk walked in. Her assistant had tried to stop him in the reception area. The assistant had been gently and firmly moved aside by Park In-soo in a way that communicated everything necessary without requiring any particular drama. Yuna turned from the window. She was 41, composed in the way of someone who had anticipated this visit and had decided exactly what to do with it. She was wearing a dark suit, and her hair was back, and her face held the expression of a woman who had made a decision she believed in and was prepared to defend it. "I expected a call," she said. "Not a visit." "I find visits more informative," Junhyuk said. He did not sit. Neither did she. "The Incheon approach?" "A business proposition," she said. "To my distribution managers," he said, "without contacting me." "I contacted Dohwan," she said. "This morning. He told me you were occupied." "You contacted Dohwan to establish that I was occupied," he said. "The contact to the managers was simultaneous. You knew I wasn't available before you made the approach." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. The honesty was strategic. He recognized it. She had decided that denial was less useful than directness, which meant she believed her position was strong enough to withstand the confrontation. "Why?" he said. She crossed her arms, not defensively, the gesture of someone organizing their thoughts into the order they'd rehearsed. "Because I have been adjacent to your commercial operations for 2 years," she said, "watching you run a parallel infrastructure in a corridor where we both operate, at a cost to both of us that neither of us needs to keep absorbing. And every time I have approached the subject through appropriate channels, the conversation has redirected." She paused. "I made the Incheon approach because I needed your attention." "You have it," he said. "I want the Northern Corridor," she said, "a joint operational structure. My logistics network combined with your distribution contacts. Revenue split at negotiated terms. Clean, documented, sustainable." He looked at her. "That's the same ask Changmin made." Something moved through her expression, fast, controlled, but there. "You spoke with Changmin." "This morning," he said, "before I came here." She absorbed this. "Then you know about the Taesung connection." "I do now," he said. She unfolded her arms. She walked to her desk and sat down with the careful movement of someone resetting their approach in real time. "Changmin and I are not aligned," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever he told you about the Incheon corridor is his ask, not mine. We arrived at the same position independently." "You expect me to believe that?" "I expect you to verify it," she said, "which you will. And you'll find I'm telling you the truth." She looked at him steadily. "The timing was bad. I didn't know you were already dealing with the Changmin situation. If I had known, I would have waited." "But you still would have made the approach." "Yes," she said, "because the position is sound regardless of timing." He stood in the middle of her office and looked at her across the desk and felt the accumulated weight of the last 18 hours sitting in his body. The sleeplessness, the cold morning in Changmin's garden, the folder, Yoonmi's silence, Amara's text sitting unfinished in his phone, all of it present simultaneously, which was not a condition he usually permitted himself. "I'm going to ask you one question," he said, "and I need an honest answer." "Ask it." "The commercial relationships your network has maintained with my Incheon channel managers over the past 3 years," he said, "were those relationships built specifically to create proximity for this approach, or were they genuine commercial relationships that you later recognized as useful?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Both," she said. "In the beginning they were genuine. About 18 months ago I recognized what they could become." He nodded once. "That's the honest answer," he said. "Is it the right one?" "It's the true one," he said. "Right is a different question." He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd set it. "I'll have someone contact you in 72 hours. Whatever arrangement I reach with Changmin on the Northern Corridor, I'll discuss a separate structure with you for the Incheon distribution. If the terms work, they work." She looked at him. "That's more than I expected." "You were honest," he said. "I can work with honest." He paused at the door. "But Yuna, the next time you need my attention, you call me directly. Not Dowan, not my channel managers. Me." She held his gaze. "Understood," she said. He left. Yunmi was at the secondary location when he returned. She was sitting at the metal table where the channel managers had been, her hands flat on the surface, her posture carrying the particular quality of someone who had been waiting and had spent the wait time deciding exactly what they intended to say. The channel managers had been sent home. Do-won was at the far end of the space, giving them the room. Park In-soo was outside. Jun Hyuk sat down across from her. She looked at him. He looked at her. 11 years of working partnership sat between them like a third presence at the table. The accumulated weight of every piece of intelligence she had brought him, every crisis she had navigated, every time she had sat in a room like this one and given him information he needed to survive. "I should have come to you first," she said. "Yes," he said. "I found the transfer record 8 months ago," she said. "And I spent 5 months trying to understand what it meant before I reached out to anyone. I wasn't running a parallel operation for personal gain. I was trying to protect you from something I didn't fully understand yet." "You contacted Chang Min's network," he said. "I contacted someone adjacent to it," she said, "because the record implicated Tai Sung's relationship with that network, and I needed to understand the scope from the outside in order to know how deep the contamination went before I brought it to you." She paused. "I was afraid that if I brought it to you half-formed, with only part of the picture, you would move immediately and the movement would tip off whoever inside the organization had been containing it. And then we'd lose the thread entirely." He was quiet. "I was trying to give you the complete picture," she said, "all at once, so you could make a clean decision. You gave it to me at 6 in the morning in a crisis situation," he said. "The timing went wrong," she said. "Chang Min moved faster than I anticipated. When he walked into the restaurant and looked at your companion, I knew I was out of time. So I gave you the record and I went to Chang Min directly and told him that if he used any of this against you, I would burn everything I had on his network going back 15 years. She said it flatly, without drama. He believed me, because I meant it. Jun Hyuk looked at her. "You threatened Chang Min," he said. "I negotiated with him," she said, "from a position I had been quietly building for 3 years, because I knew that whatever Taesung buried wasn't going to stay buried forever. And when it surfaced, I needed to have something to put on the table." The room was very quiet. He looked at Oh Hyun-mi, 53 years old, 11 years inside Baekryun, a woman who communicated in data and implication and had apparently been running a long, patient, parallel protective operation around him for 3 years without saying a word about it, and understood that the word betrayal did not fit what she had done, no matter how it had felt at 6 in the morning when Do-won's message came through. "You should have told me," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you now." He sat with that for a moment. "The folder goes into secure storage," he said. "Whatever Taesung arranged with Chang Min, it ends with the agreement I reach with him in the next 48 hours. The leverage disappears." "And the organization's foundations?" she said. "The foundations are what they are," he said. "I didn't build them. I inherited them. What I build from here is mine." He looked at her directly. "But I need to know everything you found, all of it. Not the summary, every document, every transfer record, every name." "I'll have it to you by tonight," she said. "And Hyun-mi," he stopped, started again. "What you did, the 3 years of it, the fact that you were trying to protect me when you didn't have to and I didn't even know to thank you for it." He paused. "I know." She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face shifted. Not sentimentality, Hyun-mi did not do sentimentality, but something genuine. The expression of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just been permitted to set it down. "Don't do anything that stupid again," he said. "I'll try," she said. He got back to Amara's building at 2:17 in the afternoon. He had slept for 3 hours at the secondary location between the conversation with Hyun-mi and the first of the verification calls his team ran on the documents Chang Min had provided. The 3 hours had been enough, not restorative, not comfortable, but functional. He had woken up with the particular clarity of a man who has passed through the worst of something and arrived on the other side still intact. The Chang Min agreement had taken shape over the course of the morning. Joint operational structure on the northern corridor, Revenue split at terms that were not generous to Jun Hyuk, but were honest, with a 6-month review clause that gave both organizations room to renegotiate if the integration produced unanticipated complications. The folder, Taesung's insurance policy, 9 years of buried leverage, had been transferred to Jun Hyuk's possession with a signed dissolution of Chang Min's original obligation. It was not the resolution he would have designed. It was the resolution that was available and that he could work with. The Seo Yuna situation was simpler now that he understood it. She was not an enemy. She was an opportunist who had read a genuine market gap and pursued it through methods that were aggressive but not fundamentally dishonest. The Incheon structure they would build together over the next month would be clean and profitable, and would close a gap in his distribution network that he had been aware of for 2 years without having the specific leverage to resolve. He could be annoyed about how it had arrived. He was not going to waste the outcome because of the method. The internal audit key, every person who had known about the Taesung-Changmin connection and said nothing, would take longer. Hyunmi's documents pointed to 2 individuals inside the organization's financial division who had been aware since the early years of Jun Hyuk's tenure and had maintained their silence not out of malice, but out of the particular institutional cowardice of people who knew something complicated and had decided that not being the one to surface it was safer than the alternative. He would deal with them. Not violently. That had always been Changmin's misread of him, the assumption that the Silent King resolved problems with fear rather than consequence. He would deal with them the way he dealt with most things that needed to be corrected, directly, completely, and with full accounting for what had happened and what would happen next. He pressed Amara's call button and waited. "It's me," he said. The door buzzed open. She was in the same gray sweatshirt from the morning, her laptop open on the table, papers spread the way they always were. She had been working. He had not expected her to have been doing anything else, but something about the reality of it, the simple, unperformative fact that she had stayed and worked and waited and not made the waiting into a demonstration of anything, hit him with a quality he had to take a moment to locate. She looked at him from across the room. She read his face the way she always read things, completely, without hurry, filing the result. "You're okay," she said. "Yes." "It's handled?" "Enough of it," he said. "The rest will take time." She nodded. She got up and went to the kitchen and put the kettle on, and he sat at her table and pushed some of the papers aside to make room for his elbows and put his face in his hands for a moment. Not despair, not collapse, just the specific exhale of a man allowing himself to occupy the present moment without managing it. She came back with 2 cups of tea and set one in front of him and sat across from him and did not say anything. He picked up the cup, drank, set it down. "Your fellowship organization," he said. "Chang Min's acquisition. It doesn't affect your research." He confirmed it directly, and I verified it through 2 independent channels. "Your funding is clean and stable, and nobody is going to interfere with your work." She absorbed this. "He told you I wasn't a piece on his board." "He told me." And it checked out. She held her cup in both hands and looked at the surface of the tea for a moment. "I've been thinking about that," she said, "about what it means that the organization funding my work changed hands without anyone telling me, that I could have been adjacent to something I didn't know about through no choice of my own." "Does it change what you're doing here?" he said. She looked up at him. "No," she said. "The research is the research. What I found in that archive is real and it matters, and nobody's ownership of the funding structure changes whether the findings are true." She paused. "But it makes me think about what I should know going forward, about what's around me." "That's a reasonable thing to think about," he said. "Is it something you can help me understand?" she said. "Not operationally. Not the parts I don't have a right to know, but the geography of it. What's adjacent to what? So I'm not navigating blind." He looked at her across the small table in the afternoon light that came through her window and fell across the spread papers and the research board with its connected lines and dated nodes and color-coded markers. "Yes," he said. "I can do that." She nodded once. Then she looked at him with the direct quality that had never changed from the first morning in the cafe. The attention that did not perform itself, that simply was what it was. "Your text," she said. "This morning. I sent 2 messages and you started typing back and then stopped. He had been pulling out of Changmin's road when the messages came. He had read them 3 times and started a response, and then Do-won had called and the response had sat unfinished in his phone for 8 hours. I know, he said. You don't have to explain the stopping, she said. I understand why you stopped. I'm asking about what you were going to say. He looked at her. The honest answer to that question was something he had spent 9 years building a self specifically to avoid having to give. Not because it was complicated. It wasn't complicated. It was the simplest thing he knew. It was the simplicity of it that had always been the problem. I was going to say that I know the difference too, he said, between something that happens to you and something you choose to stay in. He paused. And that I haven't chosen anything in a long time. Not really. I've managed things, controlled things, made decisions about things. But choosing, he stopped, looked at the cup in front of him, looked back at her. That's different. She held his gaze and did not feel the silence, because she understood that the silence was part of what he was saying. I'm choosing this, he said. Whatever this is, I'm doing it with full knowledge of what it costs, and what it complicates, and what it means for someone standing next to me in a city like Seoul. He paused. And I'm asking if you're still choosing it too. Not because you ended up here, and it's easier to stay, because you want to. The afternoon light shifted slightly. Outside, the city moved in its enormous, patient way. Amara set her cup down. I want to, she said. That. The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not the clean resolution of things, because clean resolutions existed in a version of reality that neither of them had ever actually lived in. The internal audit took 6 weeks and produced 3 separations from the organization and 1 demotion. The Changmin agreement held through its first review period and produced, as projected, a 31% efficiency gain in the Northern Corridor that benefited both organizations without either of them having to acknowledge the other publicly. The CO structure came together in the 2nd month and was clean and functional and profitable and never comfortable, because Yuno was not a comfortable person to do business with, which Jun Hyuk had always privately respected about her. Amara finished her archive research in the 3rd month and produced a paper that her academic advisors at Yonsei described as the most rigorous examination of Seoul's 1990s urban development policy they had encountered in recent years. The paper did not name any living individuals. It documented patterns, structures, and outcomes with the precise, evidence-based methodology of someone who had understood from the beginning that the work mattered more than the drama of attribution, and that the truth survived longer when it was built carefully than when it was deployed as a weapon. Junhyuk read it twice. He told her it was the most honest document he had encountered in years, which was not flattery but assessment, and she received it that way. Oh Hyunmi returned to her role with a formal acknowledgement from Jun Hyuk of what she had done and why, and with a structural change to her position that gave her direct access to his primary decision-making tier for the first time, something she had never had, something she had never asked for, something that had probably been the gap that made the 3 years of parallel protection feel necessary in the first place. She did not express gratitude. She sat down at the new position and went to work. That was, Junhyuk thought, the most honest response available. On a Tuesday evening in the 5th month, they were in Amara's apartment. He had long since stopped keeping precise track of how many evenings had accumulated there, which was itself information about how his relationship to the keeping track of things had shifted. And she was reading something on her laptop, and he was working through a document on his own, and the rain was happening against the window with the particular soul persistence that seemed to have no intention of stopping, and the room was full of the specific, comfortable quiet of 2 people who did not need to fill silence to justify their presence. She looked up from her laptop. What happened to the folder? She said. He looked at her. Which folder? The one from Changmin, she said. Taesung's documents. He had put it in secure storage as he'd told Hyunmi. And then, 3 weeks later, he had taken it out of storage and read everything in it. Every document, every transfer record, every piece of the architecture of a dead man's attempt to control what came after him. He had read it in one sitting, and then he had destroyed it. Not the information. Hyunmi had the verified copies in a secured archive that served as the organization's genuine record of its own complicated history. But the physical folder, the specific object that Chang Min had carried into existence as leverage and had handed over as something else. He had destroyed it because it was Taesung's, not his. Because the organization was his now, built in 9 years of his own choices on top of a foundation he hadn't laid. And the foundation was part of the history, but it was not the whole story, and he was done carrying objects that belonged to a chapter he hadn't written. "I dealt with it," he said. She looked at him for a moment, nodded once, returned to her reading. He returned to his document. The rain continued. After a while, she got up to make tea, and he watched her move through the small kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone fully at home in their own space. And he thought about the first morning in Cafe Onyx, the coffee spreading across the documents. The look on her face when she'd assessed the damage and started pulling napkins without asking anyone's permission. The way she had looked at him, not at the reputation, not at the weight that surrounded him, just at the man sitting at the table. She brought him tea without asking how he wanted it, because she already knew. He accepted it and looked at her and found, in the specific quality of that moment, the rain outside, the familiar quiet, the work spread between them, the complete absence of performance on either side, something that he had no clean organizational language for and that he no longer needed to translate into something manageable. It simply was what it was. He was not, he understood now, a man who had been made cold by the life he'd chosen. He was a man who had been waiting, without knowing it, without admitting it, without allowing the waiting to become visible, for something that was not another piece in the architecture of control. He had spent 9 years building an empire on the principle that safety came from being unreachable. Amara Whitfield had walked into a cafe on a Tuesday morning and spilled coffee on his documents and looked at him without fear, and he had spent the following months fighting the most important thing he had ever lost, which was the conviction that being unreachable was the same as being safe. It was not the same thing. He knew that now in the way you knew the things that had cost you enough to learn, not as a principle, not as a philosophy, but as a scar, present, permanent, entirely his. She settled back into her chair across from him and tucked her feet under her and opened her laptop again and said, without looking up, "You're staring." "I know," he said. "Is there a reason?" He looked at her for another moment. "I remember everything about you," he said. She looked up. The expression on her face was the one she used for things she intended to say only once. Direct, undecorated, the complete version of itself. "I know," she said. Outside, Seoul moved in its enormous and indifferent way, lit and restless and continuous, a city that had survived everything thrown at it and would survive everything still coming, built on layers of history that were complicated and imperfect and true. Inside the small apartment, the rain came down. The tea went warm between them, and the man who had ruled an empire on silence finally, completely, let the silence be something other than armor,